Welcome to Mintcast, an interview series featuring dissenting voices the establishment would rather silence. I'm your host, Manar Muhawish Adli. West Virginia. It's been dubbed as a throwaway state with throwaway people. It's a region in America often brushed under the rug in mainstream corporate media, but its significance is major. This state and its story are a microcosm of U.S. exploitation of working-class Americans at the hands of the corporate state. West Virginia is home to the opioid crisis, theft of indigenous land, environmental disaster, water contamination, oil pipelines and extraction, coal mining and fracking, and slavery. Today, we are joined by activist, journalist, and documentary filmmaker Eleanor Goldfield, whose new documentary, Hard Road of Hope, shares the stories of people in West Virginia and their struggle against the corporate state. Eleanor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So talk to me about your documentary, Hard Road of Hope. What exactly drew you to West Virginia to document what you've described as a throwaway state with throwaway people at the hands of corporate America?
Yeah, so basically that's how West Virginia is perceived, right? When people hear about West Virginia, they hear about it like, oh, that's just some throwaway state with a bunch of hillbillies and Trump voters, and who cares, right? And I grew up partially in North Carolina, and West Virginia was the butt end of jokes in North Carolina. And if you're the butt end of jokes in North Carolina, something has really gone awry. So I wanted to prove myself wrong and other people wrong. And before going to West Virginia specifically for this and these stories, I had already been through there documenting the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, the latter of which has recently just been canceled. And found West Virginia to be not only absolutely gorgeous, but the people there incredibly beautiful in terms of their radicalism and their connection to the land in a way that is not typical of most Americans, unfortunately. So I really wanted to prove folks wrong and also show that if we are going to throw away a state like West Virginia because it's filled with people who have been propagandized and oppressed, and we're going to throw away the land and the air and the water because it's been destroyed by corporate malfeasance, where in this country would be left? So really, West Virginia is a microcosm. It's also a mirror. It's a mirror of the destruction and oppression that has been meted out at the hands of the corporate state. But it's also a mirror reflection of our resistance and the resistance that can be traced back, to the end of the 19th century and the workers' rights movement that really started to form around that time. Where people overcame all kinds of divide and conquer strategies to band together and demand human rights and worker rights. So I really wanted to share that story and share how powerful it is that folks in West Virginia are reconnecting to this past that has been kept from them in order to try to build a better future.
And so how can you name the names? I mean, who are these corporations and how are they working with local and state governments to get away with this exploitation that you describe?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many names. I guess the broader name would be the coal industry and the fracking industry, because what we're seeing in West Virginia is as coal is dying, because there's just nothing left. As one former coal miner explained to me, it's like trying to scrape the last bit of peanut butter out of the jar, which is what mountaintop removal is, right? Because the simpler way of mining was just digging back into the mountain, getting heaps of coal out. So mountaintop removal is trying to get to those hard to reach seams of coal that are literally like inside the mountain under the top of it. It's the same thing with fracking, right? We've exhausted the good old ways of drilling, and so now we frack because we're desperately trying to get at what's left in those hard to reach spaces. And so what's happening right now in West Virginia is really like a transfer of power from the coal industry to the fracking industry. And what we see happening is in that transfer of power, there's a transfer of the propagandization. So what once, the bumper stickers that used to say, "Hey, do you like electricity? Then you like coal." Now it's saying, "Do you like electricity? Well, then you like fracking." This
Right,
sort
right,
of
right, right.
propagandization vis-a-vis the industry is just being transferred. And it's a lot of the same players, the folks that were, banking on coal are now shifting their money to fracking because again, coal just isn't economically viable anymore. And of course, along with this comes the deep propagandization that it's somehow like environmentalists' fault or it's the EPA's fault for handing down regulations that have killed coal, which is of course absurd, and that really again speaks to the brainwashing of the industry. When in reality, it's just that there's a finite supply of this stuff, and we've exhausted that supply, and now we're turning to much more detrimental and dangerous ways of getting at it in order to continue to prop up this dying industry, and of course that leads to the increased poverty of the people there because governments subsidize these industry to the tune of billions of dollars every year. Coal is desperately being propped up by billions of dollars. So is the oil and gas industry with regards to fracking. And the people are paying for that. Since the advent of coal in West Virginia, some $5 trillion have been mined from the hills there. And none of that money has gone to the people. West Virginia is, in fact, the third poorest state in the nation. And people suffer greatly. Lack of housing, lack of access to health care and education, and just basic needs like shelter and food. So it's really indicative. It's kind of like a very stark example of what this corporate power looks like in a place like West Virginia that was really founded to be a resource colony.
And, being a resource colony, you see this, really depressing and horrific, abject poverty that I'm sure you were witness to and you documented in your new film. You describe it as the home of the opioid crisis, environmental disaster, water contamination, theft of land, especially for the indigenous people there. I mean, these are things that when you think about it, when we think about like a resource colony, we might think of like a country like Iraq, right? Like the United States went to Iraq, invaded Iraq, set up set up its oil drilling corporations to extract and exploit the people there. And now Iraq is facing abject poverty. And we don't typically think of, a state here in the United States. And that's mostly due because the corporate mainstream media rarely talks about what's happening at the hands of these corporations right here on our own soil. So talk to me about the abject poverty that you saw. I mean, you walk into West Virginia. Tell me about the people that you saw there, the communities, and the kind of poverty that they were living in.
Yeah, and you make a great point, Minar, because I oftentimes tell people that imperialism is a home game.
Right.
The idea that the U.S. only uses imperialism outside of its own borders is not true. Of course, you practice on your own people, right? And West Virginia is a great example of that. And yeah, I mean, if you drive through West Virginia, first of all, it's not only very poor, but it's also very rural. It's the second most rural state in the nation, and so, if you drive through West Virginia, folks will know that, you oftentimes lose cell service because you're driving through hills and what they call hollers, which is basically like the hollow spaces, like the valleys between hills. You're driving through these hills and hollers on, one single lane roads that just kind of wind through the hills and the mountains there. And what you see when you wind through these areas is, a lot of folks live in trailer homes. A lot of these, communities are set up where they have, their grocery store, quote unquote, is the Dollar General. And then once you get, if you drive, 10, 15 miles, maybe you'll find a Walmart. There's basically like a couple of major highways. Charleston, the biggest city in West Virginia, is what, folks who have been to places like, Minneapolis or New York or LA would call quaint. And really what you see is you see a lot of those pictures that you'd consider to be like, oh, this is kind of the stereotype of poor white America. And it almost feels unreal because it just keeps repeating, right? It's not just like, oh, this is a poor neighborhood, and then you come to a nice neighborhood or, a quote unquote middle class neighborhood. The majority of the neighborhoods are these small, single family, single story homes that are kind of like nestled in the hollers there, up against mountains, and a lot of rebel flags, a lot of Trump flags, which really again speaks to the propagandization. But there's no, you don't see like a lot of community, and that's the other problem. And this of course leads to the opioid epidemic, because if you look at the reasons for the triggers for addiction, it's isolation, not just physical, of course, but
Right.
mental and emotional. And there are really no community spaces that you see in these places. It's it's like the Dollar General or the gas station, or there are churches here and there. But for anybody who's grown up in the South, there are a lot of churches that are the antithesis of community spaces. They're really fire and brimstone and hate your neighbor spaces. And so it's really clear that people have been their communities have been broken apart. And this is another thing that one of the people mentions in the film, is that perhaps one of the most powerful things that the coal industry did, and that the fracking industry is doing now, is break communities apart, create these divisions, create this sort of sense of hopelessness and isolation, that the only people that you can depend on are the industries that employ you. Everyone else is out to get you. Everyone else is, some trying to kill your ability to work, and thereby, starve your family, et cetera, et cetera. And so the poverty is a great tool for both the industry and, of course, big pharma as well, in terms of the opioid crisis.
Well, all of what you just described sounds like what, imperialism does overseas and what it does clearly on our own soil, which is extremely unfortunate. Right now, we are hearing a lot about the, North Dakota, about the Dakota Access Pipeline, but in fact, there's a gigantic native struggle happening right here, right there in West Virginia, struggling to protect their land from these oil and gas and coal companies. Talk to me about their struggle.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about my trip to West Virginia, and the stories that I encountered, was that I went along with a fellow journalist and friend who is Cherokee. And so those are her ancestral lands. The Cherokee Nation had lands that spanned multiple states, including parts of southern West Virginia. And it was really powerful to be there with her, because she spoke, and in the film she speaks about this as well. She speaks about the intense sense of belonging that she feels there, but of course the extreme sense of anger that she feels, seeing what's been done to the land, what has been done to her people, of course, who have been driven out of that area. And West Virginia is now a predominantly white state, with a very small demographic of indigenous peoples, and yet at the same time, she noted that the connection of that struggle, where people, black and white miners, and now, of course, folks employed by the fracking industry, are being used and abused, not in the same way, but they're experiencing oppression at the hands of this white supremacist settler colonial state. And there's the importance of drawing those connections to the plight of indigenous folks and connecting our struggles. And in the film I talk about like meeting at this intersection on the hard road of hope and understanding that while all of our struggles are different, we meet at this intersection in order to figure out better ways to fight and build. And a lot of that is recognizing indigenous perspectives and recognizing indigenous leadership. Another thing that I highlight in the film is what Afro-Dene water protector Sharif Voigtland told me, and that was that indigenous leadership is incredibly important, and it's not some heroic or cool thing. It's because they've been here the longest, they've fought the hardest, they understand the land, and they understand how to survive. And we need to learn how to survive with that perspective that we are part of the ecosystems, not above them. We don't lord over them. We are dependent upon them. So in order to move forwards and have a livable future in any way, we have to recognize and embrace this perspective. And that's why it's so important to recognize not only the indigenous struggles, but recognize how environmentalism as a whole is inextricably tied to the indigenous rights movement.
And you also talk about, West Virginia being the home of slavery too, and as part of its history. Talk to me about what you saw there that is still representative of the slave trade.
Yeah, so there's a lot of flowery stories. And again, this really speaks to how our history, not just in West Virginia, but overwhelmingly is whitewashed. And, like, oh, people with buckles on their hats met people with feathers in their hair and they traded corn and everyone lived happily ever after. It's this absurd revisionist history that is just flat out wrong. So the story that's told about West Virginia is, oh, well, they wanted to get away from Virginia because they didn't want slaves. That's just simply not true. People in that what was then part of Western Virginia had no problem owning human beings and using their labor to profit. What the truth of the story is that Abraham Lincoln recognized that he needed supply lines. And at that time, supply lines were owned by industrialists. It was coal and timber. So Abraham Lincoln went to them and said, look, for the Union Army, I need to keep supply lines open. And if you work with me on this, I will give you a state, like legitimately just give a state to the industry. And that's what happened. So in 1863, West Virginia became a state, not because it was some high and mighty, abolitionist story, because of coal and timber. And so legitimately, perhaps more overtly than other states, it was literally founded as a resource colony. Give me these supply lines. Give me this supply. And, with regards to that, the coal mining operations were basically run by a lot of African Americans who came up from the South, looking for work. And a lot of, I'm speaking about the beginning of the 20th century here, and a lot of folks coming in from Ellis Island, from all over the world, and they were placed in these mining towns where they worked for what's called, company scrip, which is not money. So they were basically, indentured servants, as it would be a nice way of putting it, but they were basically working as slaves for the coal industry and for the coal companies, because they had no actual money that they were making. They could only use the company script, of course, at the company stores. So, folks might know about the song, I sold my soul to the company store. That's where that comes from. And this is what really led to the mine wars that happened at the beginning of the 20th century, where, again, overcoming these divisions, black and white miners worked together and walked together and marched together for basic human rights and won the right to be paid in U.S. money, among other things. And what's really powerful about this is the understanding that this happened in West Virginia, and this is part of West Virginia's history at a time when Black folks had no rights whatsoever. Black and white mine workers worked together to have equal rights as coal miners. And this is actually where the term redneck comes from. Coal miners tied on red bandanas and marched together so that they could recognize each other. And they wore that term proudly. And this is, again, like that's one of the clear examples of propagandization, that redneck started as this radical term even like communist, socialist, anarchist, even. And now it's synonymous with, some right wing nutbag who hates everyone who's not white. So again, like that just really speaks to how powerful this propagandization that's taken place in West Virginia and elsewhere has been.
Well, and speaking of, there's a strong tendency in corporate media to dismiss rural West Virginians as, as a Hicks, right? Did you find it easy or difficult to tell the story of the people you met and describe the people there that you met, while in the mountains and valleys of West Virginia?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe for me it was a little bit easier because I grew up in North Carolina, and so I grew up among like rural Southern folks. But I will say one of the things that has always irritated me about a lot of like environmentalist organizers, and this was shared with me by one of the former coal miners as well. He said, environmentalists come down here and tell us what to think and what to do, and think that we're idiots that don't know what climate change is, and but it's a matter of watching your family starve or working in a coal mine.
Right.
And
Right,
until
right,
you
right.
understand that as an environmentalist, how dare you walk in here and talk to me about, quitting my job? And so I thought one of the important things to note here was to treat these people not like they're the enemy, but to recognize the plight that
Their
they're
plight,
facing,
yeah, their
and try to
struggle.
work
Yeah.
right and try to work with them as opposed to immediately walking in and making them an enemy. And another thing that really irritates me, as someone who grew up partially in the South, is that people will talk about going into these rural communities and dumbing down the rhetoric. Oh, we have to dumb it down so these people understand it. Well, that's just incredibly offensive. It's not dumbing down. It would be like saying, I'm going to France. I'm going to dumb down and speak French. No, it's just a different way of speaking. And so I think that, because these people haven't had access to the same education, that middle class white folks or, middle class people in general have had access to, doesn't mean that they don't know what oppression feels like. Everyone knows what that feels like, even if they can't talk about it like in terms of, oh, well, this late stage capitalism, but they know what it feels like, and they know what they need. They know what injustice feels like. So you meet them on that playing field, and that's not dumbing down. That's just changing the way that you speak. And so that was an important way of approaching these conversations. So while it took a little bit, to get comfortable, for folks to get comfortable with me, I think that there's an appreciation that I'm not barging in there like, hey, I'm going to tell your story, and let me also, while I'm at it, tell you what you need to do.
Right.
And
They
so I
feel
think that
demonized
that's
when they get talked to like that. They feel like,
absolutely.
you're right.
Absolutely. And so I think that was an important part of that, and also making it clear to folks that I wasn't there to tell their story. I wanted them to tell their story, and I just wanted to, document it. And I think that was another important, like I wasn't looking for a specific angle. I just came there and was like, I want to hear your story. And I think that, this is something that I've learned and that I continue to learn, but it's the way that we as organizers walk into spaces, regardless of what space that is. We have to walk into these spaces with a humility of being able to learn and able to listen
To listen,
to the
yes.
folks that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. And, I want to hear more about the environmental impact that these industries have had on these communities. Because when I think of contamination by like fracking, for example, the images that we have pulled up for our website at Mint Press are images of people like lighting up their water coming, and like flames come out of the water. What are some of the environmental issues that these communities are facing and the health impact on their bodies?
Yeah, well, coal and fracking have a lot in common. But I'll say for coal, it's a lot more obvious, because you see they're called coal slurry impoundments, and they're basically giant valleys of toxic sludge. They're giant unlined earthen dams where they just pour the excess coal slurry from, processing coal. And that, of course, seeps into the groundwater. And, for instance, I'll give you an example. In a place called Prenter, West Virginia, 98% of the people in that community developed gallbladder disease because of contaminated water. And that's on top of other issues. One woman, her 19-year-old son died of liver failure. And so there's, these stories form a patchwork of pain across West Virginia. And the problem with fracking has been that it doesn't look like coal. You can see coal dust in the air. You can, there are kids that come into schools in West Virginia in the morning and wipe coal dust off of their desks. This sounds archaic and unreal, but it's true. But fracking is a bit more insidious in the sense that you don't really see methane. You can drive down a highway, I believe it's Highway 50 in West Virginia, and at times you can smell the fracking chemicals, but at times you can't. And so people just think, oh, they just put these little drill pads there. And bummer for the people who live next to a compressor station because that's super loud. But other than that, it doesn't seem bad, right? It doesn't look bad. But then all of a sudden you've got animals dying. I spoke to folks who said that they cough violently, and they're no one can tell them exactly what it is. They've got trees dying, they've got plants and crops dying all over the place. Whenever they're fracking, the animals just freak out, and of course, some of them, as I noted, do end up dying because of contaminated, grazing areas and water. And then, of course, there's the issue of no. There's absolutely no government regulation or any accountability from the companies. One couple explained to me that they complained, and so what happened was that somebody came and tested the water, and they sent them a list of chemicals that are used in fracking. Well, when they looked at what chemicals they tested for in the water, they didn't test for a single one of those chemicals. But at the same time, they were like, "Cool, we tested your water; it's fine." But you didn't test for anything that you've put into the water.
Yes.
So these kind of issues are rampant in West Virginia, and it really again speaks to the sort of flippancy with which the industry works in destroying the environment, and how the government doesn't care. One woman said that she had they had gone to their local community meetings, and then all of a sudden the community board started instituting rules that if you'd already spoken on a subject, you can't speak again. We've heard enough. And oh, by the way, all of these companies have permits, so you guys just needed to stop complaining because it's all legal. It's all perfectly fine and normal. So it's really, the captured agencies, the captured government, and of course this leads to this sort of feeling again of isolation and this feeling of, well, I don't trust the government, which of course unfortunately then leads people to see someone like Trump as an outsider, and based on the propagandization that they've been subjected to for decades and generations, they fall into that trap.
Well, I was going to ask how, you talk about the people there that, are waving the Trump flag. I mean, what do they think Trump is going to do for them?
Yeah, it's, a former coal miner who had, previously, I don't want to say worked with Bernie, but had previously, talked about the potential of why Bernie would be good, said that, he said that we're programmed for Trump. And what he means by that is that someone like Trump is seen as the antithesis to the dynastic
right.
realities of, Clinton or Bush or really, Biden, same thing. They look at them and they look at their state officials and they say, you guys are part of the problem. You are entrenched politicians and we know better. And then they see someone like Trump, and Trump was like, we're bringing back coal, as if you could just bring more coal into the ground. But people see that, and they've been programmed to
right.
feel such a deep connection to coal that they see the coal industry as part of their identity, which is another part of why it's difficult to organize in places like West Virginia, because when you say no to coal, people feel like you're saying no to them as people. And so that's a really deep issue that needs to be worked on and sort of massaged out like scar tissue. But I mean, yeah, it's this ridiculous perception that Trump is somehow an outsider when, of course, he is like the poster child for the billionaire
Right.
idiot class. But I think some people are shifting, particularly with the virus now, seeing that Trump isn't different. He is more of the same. He is more of the same that promotes this sense of you're unworthy. You all are just hicks and hillbillies, and who cares? So I think, but he still has these dog whistle moments where he speaks to those people and talks about how great poor white folks are, and how proud they should be to be poor white folks. And so it's still a problem of seeing their connection to being poor and white as opposed to seeing the connection to the class struggle and the larger struggle of all people who are oppressed under this boot of capitalism and this boot of corporate malfeasance. And so that's really some of the powerful work that's happening in West Virginia, as I mentioned in the film, is connecting people to their radical history so that they feel a personal connection to it, so that it's not an outsider saying, hey, here's what to think. This is what their grandparents thought. This is what their grandparents fought for as coal miners, and the importance of connecting people to their radical history and thereby using it to build a radical future.
Well, and journalist Chris Hedges has described the West Virginia mountains as an economic sacrifice zone of capitalism, just like you described it, where corporations have been allowed to plunder the earth and have left the consequences of those left behind, or left the consequences to those left behind. Did you get a sense that, or did the people there, when you spoke to them, did you feel like they felt like they were being sacrificed? I mean, you talk about the people whose identity is defined by these industries, but did you also feel like there were a group of people who feel sacrificed, like their communities have been left to die by the government?
Absolutely. And I think that for a lot of folks, I think there's this cognitive dissonance happening where, they get screwed over by a coal company, that goes bankrupt and decides they're not paying their pensions or they're not paying them back wages. And they find themselves saying, well, that's just a bad company, but the industry is good. And there's this push and pull happening right now, which is why, there's a way for organizers to really get in there and kind of dismantle this programming. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, there are definitely people that feel that they have been used and abused, and these are oftentimes the people who are rising up and saying, look, we can do better. We have to do better. And people that are looking for alternatives. One former coal miner told me, he's like, you want to make environmentalists? I'll tell you how to make environmentalists. You take 500 coal miners out of the mines and you put them to work in some renewable energy project. Give them something to do. Give them a way to feel, yeah, and give them a way to feel that they are somehow building a community that has been destroyed, because really it comes back to basic human psychology. Our monkey brains want to feel like we're part of the group, and this is, of course, part of the issue with West Virginia is that people feel very isolated and broken apart and alone, and like no one cares about them. So what better way to combat that than to build community on the foundations of something renewable, something that is good for not only planet but for people too, because people are dying far earlier than they should because of cases of black lung and because, as I noted, poisoned air and water and land. So these conversations are definitely happening, and they're being started by the people who are feeling used and abused and recognize that there is an alternative path to just falling back on despair and falling back on Trump.
And, you mentioned you talked to former coal miners. Talk to me about what exactly they are doing to resist this, corporate state that's exploiting them. You also talked about the people that are, going to like the community meetings, but they're not allowed to speak for the second time. I mean, how are they rising above, and who are they? Tell me about who they are.
Yeah, so I think something that's really interesting is the UMWA, which is the United Mine Workers of America, which used to be one of the most powerful unions, is now spreading itself into areas that are not coal mining. They have UMWA members that work at hospitals and UMWA members that work in other industries besides coal. And the goal is for a lot of folks in the UMWA is to have a presence in the renewable energy sector. So a lot of people are pushing for that and using this sort of strength of unions, this collective strength to push for that. And West Virginia recently had some pretty good election results based on this idea of an alternative to the corporate malfeasance and the great level of destruction that's been pushed forward by both coal and fracking. It's a lot of the people in terms of former coal miners and in terms of people fighting are just doing the unsexy work of community outreach. I saw a tweet the other day that said, I think people should realize that being an organizer is like 98%, Zoom calls and knocking on doors and spreadsheets and planning. Like 2% is being out in the street. And that's so true, because the difficult work is the behind the scenes work. It's the sitting down with people on their porch and having a beer and talking about, hey, so you don't trust the government? I don't trust the government either. Let's talk about it. And I think this is the work that's happening. And, I heard from somebody that I spoke to, when the primaries were still going on, that she was walking around talking to folks about Bernie. And she was very pleased with the results, because she would start out by saying like, hey, what do you all do? Oh, you work in the mines, or, oh, you work in the fracking industry. Well, let's talk about this. And oh, you've already had like a miscarriage. Well, let's talk about why. And like that's horrible. And so this kind of community outreach is how people are kind of getting around the issue of a really corrupt government. Because again, the idea of not being allowed to speak to your government officials because they've just instituted this new rule is again just another tactic to avoid having to deal with the fallout of this great oppression. So people are finding ways to circumnavigate it, and in so doing, they're also finding people to run for office that are better suited for the needs of both people and planet.
And so how is the local government responding to people organizing, and are they working hand in hand with the oil and gas and oil, gas and coal industry?
Yeah, they absolutely are. I mean, what I heard about and saw in West Virginia is very reminiscent of what I heard and saw in Pennsylvania, where local governments are deep in the pockets of fracking. Pennsylvania being one of the most fracked states, if not the most fracked states in the country. Same thing in Louisiana. Try talking to somebody who isn't bought by bought by oil and chem. It's impossible. So I think people, in terms of the local governments, people have deep distrust of their local governments, which is very warranted. But it's also something that local organizers are working to shift in terms of getting other folks to run and win on the idea that people should vote in local. In their local elections, because there's actually a lot you can do in local elections to facilitate change. But yeah, I mean, the bought and paid for aspect of politicians in West Virginia is incredibly stark. But again, it's a story that's very similar, and I've had a lot of people reach out. I had a former steel worker in Ohio message me saying that, this is my story too, and I completely relate to these guys, the former coal miners, I completely relate to them. This isn't just a West Virginia story. This is an American story.
Well, and you talk about this story being a mirror of of the entire landscape of the United States. I'm curious about what alternatives are rising in West Virginia to coal, gas, and fracking. I mean, what comes to mind to me is that I remember a couple of years ago, I don't remember what state it was. It actually might have been West Virginia, where people were installing like solar panels on their houses, and then the state went in and made it illegal because they wanted people to rely on like the electrical companies. I mean, that's just an example of how the deep pockets of the industry are entrenched in local government. talk to me about, I mean, what are there alternatives that are rising up, and are they facing setbacks because of this corporate government relationship?
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of hurdles. I spoke to one man who basically lives off the grid. He collects rainwater and then filters it for all of his household water needs. He has solar panels that provide all the electricity, and I damn near burned myself when I took a shower because the electricity
Was
is
it too
so
hot?
good that, oh my gosh, it was so hot. And he has, like a toilet that burns. I don't know what they're called, but that has a toilet that basically like burns and then it creates ash, which he then spreads on his yard and in the woods. It's
Wow.
great. And he works with folks in basically shifting their homes to solar powered. And he said that they've run into a lot of hurdles because, of course, the state is propping up the coal industry and the fracking industry, but God forbid they give any subsidies to the renewable energy sector. But what's actually happening, which is kind of cool, because of that, is and folks might have seen recent films or talks about like the danger of big green in terms of the renewable energy sector, like chopping down forests in order to install solar farms and things like
Yes.
that. And what's happening in West Virginia is an interesting, basically because people are having to work kind of like on the down low because the state isn't subsidizing anything, is you have these smaller, more autonomous, community run solar panels and solar farms and things like that, which is actually how it should be, right? And in terms of other alternatives, these unfortunately you can't ever fully bring back a mountain that has been decimated by mountaintop removal. There's these talks of reclamation, but it's basically like once you've decapitated the mountain, you've decapitated the being, which is of course grotesque, but it is unfortunately the truth. Um, but these places, which are, of course, very toxic with chemicals, could be great spots for small wind farms because they've just been, they've clear cut an entire mountaintop. And you're on top of a mountain, so there's plenty of wind. And so I saw several spots where this would be a very viable option for a small scale wind farm. So there's a lot that you could do in West Virginia, and people are really having these conversations. They're talking about how this could be viable. They're seeing how it works by shifting their own homes or even starting small with like, hey, I've got this shed, because a lot of people live on like just a lot of land. Not because they're well off, just because there is a lot of land. So they've got like a shed over here, and they're like, well, maybe I'll put some solar panels over there and see how it works. So people are learning how this could work for them, and then thereby, like showing it by doing, you see that, well, actually, this makes more sense, and I don't have to be a part of this coal industry anymore. I don't have to be part of the fracking industry. I could try working with renewable energy sources. So it's happening small scale, and of course, there's the worry that it's not happening fast enough. But I think that with the diversity of tactics that people are using, and this onward marching shift in perspectives and shift in energy sources, West Virginia could be a great example of how to build that livable future.
And what are you hoping to achieve with this film? I mean, you share these incredible stories of people struggling, being exploited, yet so many rising to the challenge and trying to, rise up against this corporate state being a resource colony. What do you hope to achieve with this film?
Well, I want to share these stories because I think they're so important. Because I think a lot of people feel lost and isolated. A lot of people feel that things are hopeless. And by connecting to a radical past, you recognize that your struggle is not your own. Your struggle is echoes with history. It echoes with the power of the people that have come before you. And I think that it's important to recognize that, and it's important to see what we can learn from the history, of course, because, just like with, a person, if you don't know who you've been, how do you know who you are? if we don't know who we've been in the past, how could we possibly know who we are and possibly build a future? So I really want to share these stories for that sake. And also, the film is called Hard Road of Hope, and in that, I want to recognize that hope isn't always easy.
Yeah.
But as Huey P. Newton said in his book Revolutionary Suicide, I have to live with hope and dignity. It's the only way that I can do this, and I have to fight for my community. So I think that it's not always easy to hope. But I think it's what we have, and a lot of that is built on the past, and a lot of that is built on this feeling of solidarity that gets built in the shadow of capitalism that tries to keep us isolated, that tries to keep us alone. But by connecting to the past, we can also connect to each other in the present, and thereby build solidarity in order to build a better future. And that's really the points that I want to get across with the film.
And just imagine if the people of West Virginia stood up strong, united together against this, being a resource colony, against these oil, gas, and coal companies. I mean, imagine the domino effect that would have across the state. Across the states, and just the kind of courage it would spread to other people. It would inspire people to be more courageous, to stand up. Because the truth is, Eleanor, you and I both know that it's really just about uniting, right? It's about finding the courage within ourselves, because we all have it, and believing that it is the 1%. It is these corporate entities that are dividing us. They're occupying us to fight each other while they exploit us. And if only we could unite, we would be a much stronger force. It doesn't matter how many weapons or shiny metal weapons they have. It truly is up to the people to rise up. Eleanor, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for sharing the story of West Virginia. You can find her new documentary at hardroadofhope.com. And that's a wrap for today's Mintcast podcast. You can support this program by becoming a member on our Patreon page. We'll see you next week.